I never imagined that the woman who married my son would one day look me in the eye and tell me I was nothing more than hired help. My name is Margaret, and at 73 years old, I thought I understood what family meant. I thought love and loyalty were things you could count on when blood ran through the same veins. I was wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sunlight filtered through my kitchen curtains as I prepared breakfast for my twin grandsons, Charlie and Max. At 5 years old, they were bundles of energy, wrapped in superhero pajamas, chattering about cartoons and playground adventures. Steam rose from their oatmeal bowls while one packed their lunchboxes with careful precision. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into triangles, apple slices arranged just so, and those little crackers shaped like goldfish that they adored. This had become my routine for the past 3 years, ever since my daughter-in-law Jessica returned to her demanding career in marketing. Every weekday morning at 7 sharp, she would drop the boys off at my modest 2-bedroom home in Riverside, California, her heels clicking against my front porch as she rushed past me with barely a greeting. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, her designer handbag swinging as she hurried back to her luxury sedan. I had raised my son Daniel to be respectful and kind, values I learned from my late husband Thomas during our 47 years of marriage. Thomas passed away 8 years ago, leaving me with this house, some savings and memories that filled every corner of our shared life. Daniel inherited his father's gentle nature and strong work ethic, becoming a successful architect who designed beautiful homes for families throughout Southern California. When he met Jessica at a conference in San Diego, I was hopeful. She was ambitious, intelligent, and seemed to make him happy. Their wedding 5 years ago was a grand affair at the Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel. Jessica spared no expense, choosing imported flowers, a 7-course dinner, and a dress that cost more than my monthly budget. I contributed what I could, but I knew it was a drop in the ocean compared to her family's wealth. Her parents owned a chain of upscale restaurants throughout Orange County, and they made it clear that they expected their daughter to maintain a certain lifestyle. The boys were born 2 years later, and I fell in love with them instantly. Charlie had Daniel's curious brown eyes and gentle demeanor, while Max inherited his mother's determination and boundless energy. When Jessica announced she was returning to work after her maternity leave, I volunteered to help with childcare. I had retired from my job as a school secretary and had plenty of time to spare. Besides, spending time with my grandsons felt like a gift, not a burden. What started as occasional babysitting quickly evolved into full-time care. Jessica's career demands seemed to grow exponentially, requiring longer hours, weekend conferences, and frequent business trips. Daniel tried his best to balance his architectural practice with family responsibilities, but his own schedule was packed with client meetings and project deadlines. Gradually, more and more of the boys' daily care fell to me. I drove them to preschool every morning, picked them up in the afternoon, and filled their hours with activities that cost nothing but meant everything. We visited the local library for story time, where Mrs. Henderson would read tales of brave knights and magical kingdoms. We explored Riverside's parks, feeding ducks at the pond and collecting interesting rocks that the boys would arrange in elaborate patterns on my coffee table. I taught them to plant seeds in small pots on my kitchen windowsill, watching their faces light up when tiny green shoots emerged from the dark soil. On rainy days, we built elaborate forts using dining room chairs and old bed sheets, creating secret hideaways where we would share whispered stories and homemade cookies. I showed them how to mix cookie dough, their small hands covered in flour as they giggled and licked the spoon when they thought I wasn't looking. These were the moments that filled my heart with purpose, reminding me why grandmotherhood felt like life's greatest blessing. Jessica rarely acknowledged these efforts. When she picked up the boys in the evenings, she would glance at her phone while they excitedly recounted their day's adventures. If Charlie mentioned the butterfly we had watched emerge from its chrysalis in my garden, she would nod absently and ask if he had finished his snack. If Max proudly displayed a drawing he had created, she would smile briefly before redirecting the conversation to dinner plans or tomorrow's schedule. I convinced myself that her distraction was simply the result of exhaustion from her demanding career. Working mothers face incredible pressures, and I remembered feeling overwhelmed when Daniel was young, even though Thomas and I shared the responsibilities. Jessica was essentially managing everything alone, since Daniel's work kept him busy well into the evening hours most days of the week. The first crack in my understanding came during Charlie's 4th birthday party. I had spent weeks planning a superhero-themed celebration, decorating my backyard with red and blue streamers, preparing themed snacks, and organizing games that would keep a dozen preschoolers entertained. Jessica arrived with an elaborate cake from an expensive bakery, immediately instructing me to remove the homemade cake I had decorated with Charlie's favorite cartoon characters. "Margaret, we can't have 2 cakes," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when correcting me. "This one looks more professional for the photos." I watched Charlie's face fall as she moved my cake to the kitchen counter, hidden from the party guests. He had helped me mix the batter and choose the colored frosting, spending an entire afternoon creating something special together. But Jessica was already directing the photographer she had hired, positioning the children around her professionally decorated cake for social media pictures. Later, when the guests had gone home and I was cleaning up the remnants of wrapping paper and party favors, Jessica approached me with a list written on expensive stationery. It contained detailed instructions for the boys' care, including approved snacks, educational activities, and strict screen time limits. At the bottom, she had written my expected arrival and departure times, formatted like a job description. "I thought it would help to have everything written down," she explained, handing me the paper. "This way, we're all on the same page about expectations." I studied the list, noting how it reduced my relationship with Charlie and Max to a series of tasks and schedules. There was no mention of the stories we shared, the games we invented, or the quiet moments when one of them would curl up beside me on the couch, seeking comfort after a scraped knee or a bad dream. According to this document, I was responsible for meals, transportation, and supervision. Nothing more, nothing less. "Of course," I replied, folding the paper carefully. "Whatever you think is best for the boys." That list marked the beginning of a subtle but steady shift in how Jessica treated me. What had once felt like a collaborative family effort gradually transformed into something more formal and distant. She began leaving longer lists of instructions, questioning my decisions about everything from snack choices to playground activities. When I mentioned that Charlie was struggling with his letters, she researched expensive tutoring programs, instead of letting me work with him, using the phonics methods I had learned during my years in elementary school administration. The boys thankfully remained unaffected by the growing tension. They continued to run to me with open arms each morning, sharing their dreams from the night before, and making elaborate plans for our day. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story, together. Max would always ask if we could visit the ducks at Fairmont Park, while Charlie preferred our trips to the Riverside Public Library, where he could lose himself in picture books about dinosaurs and space exploration. I treasured these relationships, understanding that my role in their lives was temporary but precious. Someday, they would be too old for afternoon snacks and bedtime stories. They would develop their own interests, make their own friends, and need me less and less. But for now, I was their anchor during the busy days, their source of comfort when the world felt overwhelming, and their biggest cheerleader when they mastered new skills like tying shoes or recognizing sight words. Daniel seemed oblivious to the subtle changes in Jessica's behavior toward me. When he was home, which happened primarily on weekends, he was genuinely grateful for my help and always made sure to ask about my own well-being. He would insist on taking me out to dinner at least once a month, usually to a quiet restaurant where we could talk without interruption. During these conversations, I learned about his latest architectural projects, his hopes for expanding his business, and his dreams of someday designing sustainable housing for low-income families. "Mom, I don't know what we would do without you," he told me one evening over pasta at our favorite Italian restaurant in downtown Riverside. "Jessica's career is really taking off, and my practice is growing faster than I ever imagined. Having you with the boys gives us peace of mind that they're in loving hands." I smiled, warmed by his appreciation, but also sensing the unspoken pressure he was feeling. Daniel had always been a perfectionist, setting impossibly high standards for himself in every aspect of life. Now he was trying to excel as a husband, father, and business owner simultaneously, leaving little time for rest or reflection. I worried about the toll this pace was taking on him, but I also understood his drive to provide for his family and build a legacy he could be proud of. "You know I love spending time with Charlie and Max," I assured him. "They bring so much joy to my days. I just want to make sure I'm helping in the way you and Jessica need." "You're perfect, Mom," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Don't ever doubt that." If only Jessica shared his sentiment. Over the following months, her instructions became increasingly detailed and critical. She questioned my choice to let the boys play in my backyard sandbox, worried about germs and cleanliness. She disapproved of our frequent library visits, preferring structured educational activities that could be documented and measured. When I taught them simple card games like Go Fish and Old Maid, she suggested flashcards and educational apps instead. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. I had planned an indoor treasure hunt for Charlie and Max, hiding small toys and treats throughout my house and creating elaborate clues that would challenge their reading skills while keeping them entertained. They spent the entire afternoon giggling and searching, working together to solve riddles and discover hidden surprises. By the time Jessica arrived to pick them up, they were exhausted but happy, proudly showing off their treasures and begging to do another hunt the next day. Jessica surveyed my living room, taking in the moved furniture and scattered clues with obvious disapproval. "Margaret, the house looks like a tornado hit it," she said, bending down to straighten a throw pillow. "I hope you're planning to clean this up before tomorrow." "Of course," I replied, already gathering the paper clues. The boys had such a wonderful time. They worked together on every puzzle and practiced their reading skills. "That's nice," she said absently, checking her phone for messages. "But in the future, could you keep the activities contained to one room? It's a lot of disruption for what could be accomplished with a simple coloring book." I felt something twist in my stomach, a combination of hurt and frustration that I had been suppressing for months. "Jessica, they're children. They need space to explore and play creatively. A little mess is worth seeing them so engaged and happy." She looked up from her phone, her expression hardening. "Margaret, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I have very specific ideas about how I want my children raised. Structure and cleanliness are important values in our family." Her words stung more than I expected. Our family. As if I were an outsider, a hired worker rather than their grandmother, who loved them unconditionally. I watched as she gathered their backpacks and jackets, efficiently organizing their belongings, while the boys reluctantly prepared to leave. "Can we do another treasure hunt tomorrow, Grandma?" Charlie asked, tugging on my sleeve. Before I could answer, Jessica intervened. "We'll see, honey. Grandma needs to focus on your educational activities during the day." That night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea, replaying the conversation and trying to understand where things had gone wrong. I had devoted 3 years to caring for Charlie and Max, adjusting my entire life around their needs and schedules. I had given up social activities with friends, declined invitations to senior center events, and rearranged my own appointments to accommodate their family's constantly changing demands. Perhaps most significantly, I had spent a considerable portion of my savings on their care. Gas money for countless trips to preschool, parks and activities. Groceries to keep my pantry stocked with their favorite foods. Toys, books, and educational materials that I purchased because I wanted to enrich their experiences. New car seats when they outgrew their old ones, a safety gate for my staircase, and child-proof locks for every cabinet in my house. The financial impact had been substantial but manageable, thanks to the life insurance policy Thomas had left me and the modest investment portfolio we had built together over decades of careful saving. What hurt was not the money itself, but the complete lack of acknowledgement or appreciation for these contributions. Jessica tracked every dollar of her own spending on the boys, frequently mentioning the cost of their preschool tuition, clothing, and extracurricular activities. But my contributions seemed invisible, expected rather than valued. I began to notice other small slights that I had previously overlooked or explained away. Jessica never invited me to stay for dinner when I brought the boys home, even when I could smell something delicious cooking in her kitchen. She never asked about my own health or well-being, despite my recent struggles with arthritis that made lifting and chasing 2 active boys increasingly difficult. When other parents at preschool functions assumed I was the nanny, Jessica never corrected them or introduced me as the children's grandmother. The final insult came 3 weeks later, during a conversation that would change everything between us forever. I had arrived at Jessica's house to drop off some books Charlie had left at my home, only to overhear her talking on the phone in the kitchen. The front door was slightly ajar, and her voice carried clearly through the elegant foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier. "Oh, we have the best situation," she was saying, presumably to a friend or colleague. "Daniel's mother watches the boys every day, and she's basically just the babysitter. It's so much cheaper than a nanny service, and we don't have to worry about background checks or contracts or any of that hassle. She just does whatever we tell her to do." I stood frozen in the doorway, her words hitting me like a physical blow. Just the babysitter. Not their grandmother, not a family member, not someone who loved those children with every fiber of her being. Just hired help, who could be dismissed and replaced at will. The best part is that she never complains or asks for anything. Jessica continued, her laughter bright and careless. "Some of my friends pay fortune for childcare, and here we have free babysitting whenever we need it. She even buys them toys and treats with her own money. It's like having a live-in grandmother without actually having to live with her." I backed away from the door quietly, my hands shaking as I returned to my car. The books could wait. Everything could wait, while I processed the reality of how Jessica truly saw me. Not as family, not as a loving grandmother, but as a convenient service provider who worked for free and asked for nothing in return. That evening, I called Daniel and asked if we could have coffee together the next morning. Something in my voice must have concerned him, because he immediately cleared his schedule and agreed to meet me at our usual cafe near his office. I spent the night rehearsing what I would say, trying to find words that would convey my hurt without creating problems in his marriage. But when I sat across from my son the next morning, watching him stir sugar into his coffee with the same careful precision he had shown as a child, I couldn't bring myself to repeat Jessica's cruel words. This was the man I had raised, my greatest accomplishment and deepest love. He was trying so hard to balance everything, to be everything to everyone. How could I add to his burden by revealing that his wife saw his mother as nothing more than free labor? "I've been thinking about reducing my time with the boys," I said carefully, testing the words. "Maybe it would be good for them to have more structured daycare or a professional nanny." Daniel's face fell immediately. "Mom, did something happen? Are Charlie and Max too much for you? I know they can be a handful." "No, sweetheart, they're wonderful," I assured him quickly. "I love every moment with them. I just wonder if Jessica might prefer a more professional arrangement." He leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the same analytical expression he used when reviewing architectural blueprints. "Has Jessica said something to make you feel unwelcome?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with potential for truth or continued deception. I could tell him about the lists, the constant corrections, the complete lack of appreciation for everything I had given up to help their family. I could describe how Jessica spoke about me when she thought I wasn't listening, reducing our relationship to a simple economic transaction. Instead, I chose protection over honesty. Not specifically. I just want to make sure I'm doing what's best for everyone. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "Mom, you are what's best for everyone. Jessica and I both know how lucky we are to have you. The boys adore you, and frankly, I don't think we could manage without your help." His words were sincere, but they also revealed how little he understood about the dynamics in his own household. Jessica had successfully created a narrative where she appeared grateful and collaborative while treating me as expendable help. She saved her true feelings for conversations with friends and colleagues, maintaining the facade of family harmony whenever Daniel was present. I squeezed his hand and smiled, making a decision that would protect his peace of mind while quietly beginning to protect my own dignity. "You're right, of course. I suppose I've just been feeling a little tired lately. Why don't you take a vacation?" he suggested immediately. "Jessica and I can arrange for temporary care, and you could visit your sister in Phoenix, or take that cruise you've been talking about for years." The irony was not lost on me. After 3 years of daily childcare, he was suggesting I take a vacation as if I were an employee who had earned some time off. But his offer also presented an opportunity to test exactly how much Jessica valued my contributions to their family. "That's a wonderful idea," I said, already formulating a plan. "I think a week away would be refreshing. Let me talk to Jessica about scheduling." That afternoon, I called Jessica to discuss the possibility of taking a short vacation. Her response was telling. "A vacation? When?" she asked, her tone immediately stressed. "I was thinking next month sometime. Daniel suggested it, and I realized I haven't taken any real time away in years." There was a long pause. "Margaret, next month is incredibly busy for me. I have 3 major campaigns launching, and Daniel has that big presentation for the waterfront development project. Could you possibly wait until summer?" "It's only a week," I said gently. "Surely you and Daniel can manage for 7 days?" Another pause, longer this time. "Well, I suppose we could look into temporary care. It will be expensive, and finding someone trustworthy on short notice won't be easy. But if you really need to go..." Her reluctance spoke volumes. Despite claiming I was just the babysitter, she clearly understood the value of the services I provided. Professional childcare for 2 children would cost several $100s per week, not including the additional expenses for meals, activities, and transportation that I covered without compensation. "I appreciate your flexibility," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'll make arrangements for the 2nd week of November." Over the following weeks, I watched Jessica scramble to organize alternative childcare. She contacted several nanny services, recoiling at their rates and requirements. She asked her own mother for help, only to be reminded that her parents were leaving for their annual European vacation. She even approached other preschool mothers about temporary arrangements, discovering that most were dealing with their own childcare challenges. Meanwhile, I began making subtle changes to my routine with Charlie and Max. Instead of buying groceries specifically for their meals, I prepared simple snacks from ingredients I already had. Instead of planning elaborate educational activities, we focused on free options like nature walks and library visits. I stopped purchasing toys and books, encouraging them to be creative with items they could find around my house. The boys didn't notice these changes because my love and attention remained constant. We still read stories together every afternoon, still played imaginative games, still shared quiet conversations about their hopes and dreams. But I was gradually reducing the financial and emotional investment I had been making in their daily care. Jessica, however, began to notice. She commented on the simpler snacks, questioned why we hadn't visited the Children's Museum recently, and asked why I hadn't bought Halloween costumes for the boys as I had in previous years. Each question revealed her expectation that I would continue providing these extras without recognition or compensation. "I've been trying to be more mindful of my spending," I explained when she asked about the Halloween costumes. "Perhaps you and Daniel would like to choose their outfits this year." Her expression tightened. "Margaret, we're already paying for so many things. I thought the costumes were something you enjoyed doing." There it was again. The assumption that my enjoyment justified my expense, that my love for the boys meant I should be happy to subsidize their family's budget. I smiled politely and nodded, but internally I was keeping track of every instance where Jessica expected my financial contributions while simultaneously treating me as hired help. My planned vacation was still 2 weeks away when everything changed in a single afternoon. I was helping Charlie with a puzzle at my kitchen table while Max napped on my living room couch, exhausted from our morning at the park. The house was quiet except for the gentle sounds of autumn wind rustling the leaves in my backyard. The phone rang just as Charlie successfully placed the last piece of his dinosaur puzzle, and he cheered with delight while I answered the call. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" The voice was professional, formal. "This is James Patterson from Patterson Williams & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of your late husband, Thomas Rodriguez." I felt my breath catch. Thomas had been gone for 8 years, and I thought all matters related to his estate had been settled long ago. "Yes, this is Margaret Rodriguez. Is there some kind of problem?" "Not a problem, ma'am. Quite the opposite, actually. We've been trying to reach you regarding an unclaimed inheritance. Your husband was named as the sole beneficiary in the will of his uncle, Samuel Rodriguez, who passed away last year in Mexico City. The estate has finally been processed through international courts, and we're prepared to transfer the inheritance to you as Thomas's surviving spouse. I sank into my kitchen chair, watching Charlie arrange his puzzle pieces into neat rows while trying to process this unexpected news. Thomas had rarely spoken about his extended family in Mexico, and I had never heard of an Uncle Samuel. "I'm sorry, but I think there might be some mistake," I said carefully. "My husband never mentioned this uncle, and we would have known if there were any pending inheritances. That's quite common in international cases, Mrs. Rodriguez." Samuel Rodriguez was estranged from most of the family for many years due to a business dispute. He made his fortune in real estate development and had no children of his own. According to his will, he wanted to reconcile with the family by leaving his estate to Thomas, his brother's son. My heart was pounding now. What kind of estate are we discussing? After taxes and legal fees, the inheritance totals approximately $3 million, Mrs. Rodriguez. We'll need you to come in and sign some paperwork, but the funds can be transferred to your account within 2 weeks. I nearly dropped the phone. Charlie looked up at me with concern, sensing something significant was happening even though he couldn't understand the conversation. "Mrs. Rodriguez? Are you still there?" "Yes," I managed to whisper. "Yes, I'm here." After arranging an appointment to visit their office the following morning, I hung up the phone and sat in stunned silence. Charlie resumed playing with his puzzle pieces while I tried to comprehend how drastically my life had just changed. For 8 years I had lived modestly on Thomas's life insurance and our small savings account, carefully budgeting every expense and avoiding unnecessary purchases. I had worn the same winter coat for 5 seasons, drove my reliable but aging Honda Civic until it barely passed inspection, and turned down my thermostat to save on heating bills. Not because I was poverty-stricken, but because I wanted to be responsible with the resources Thomas had left me. Now, suddenly, I was a millionaire. The irony was not lost on me. Jessica, who treated me like hired help and spoke about me as if I were a financial burden, had no idea that I was now wealthier than her entire family. The woman who complained about the cost of professional child care while expecting me to provide free services was about to discover that her cheap babysitter could afford to hire 10 nannies without making a dent in her bank account. But more than the financial implications, this inheritance felt like a message from Thomas, a reminder of my own worth and dignity. For 3 years, I had allowed Jessica to diminish me, to reduce my contributions to simple economic transactions. I had accepted her condescension and criticism, because I believed maintaining family harmony was more important than defending myself. Now I had the resources to make different choices. That evening, after Jessica collected the boys with her usual hurried efficiency, I sat in my living room and made a list of everything I wanted to change. Not out of revenge or spite, but out of a newfound understanding of my own value. I was not just the babysitter. I was Margaret Rodriguez, a woman who had raised a successful son, maintained a loving marriage for nearly 5 decades, and contributed meaningfully to her community for over 7 decades. I deserved better than Jessica's casual dismissal and unspoken contempt. More importantly, Charlie and Max deserved to know their grandmother as someone worthy of respect, not as hired help who could be taken for granted. The next morning, I visited the law office and signed the necessary paperwork to claim Thomas's uncle's inheritance. The lawyers were professional and thorough, explaining tax implications and investment options while I absorbed the reality of my new financial situation. By lunchtime, I was officially a millionaire, though the funds wouldn't be accessible for another 10 days. I spent that afternoon at the Riverside Public Library, not with Charlie and Max for once, but researching options for my future. I investigated travel opportunities, philanthropic organizations, and investment strategies. For the first time in years, I was making plans based on my own desires, rather than someone else's schedule and expectations. When Jessica arrived to drop off the boys the next morning, I was ready for her with my own list of changes. "Jessica, I need to discuss some modifications to our arrangement," I said as Charlie and Max ran into my house, eager to begin their day. She glanced at her watch impatiently. "Can we make this quick? I have an early meeting." Of course. I've decided to reduce my availability to 3 days per week instead of 5. I'll be available Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, but you'll need to make other arrangements for Mondays and Fridays. Her face went pale. Margaret, you can't be serious. We depend on you. What am I supposed to do about childcare on those days? The same thing other working parents do, I replied calmly. Hire professional help, or adjust your schedules. But why? What's changed? She demanded, her voice rising. I looked at her steadily, remembering her phone conversation about her free babysitter, who never complained or asked for anything. I've realized that I have other interests and commitments I'd like to pursue. This new schedule will begin next Monday. Jessica stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. In her world, grandmothers existed solely to provide convenient, free childcare without any needs or desires of their own. The possibility that I might want to reclaim some autonomy had apparently never occurred to her. Margaret, please be reasonable, she said, attempting to regain her composure. If this is about money, we can discuss some kind of compensation. There it was. The acknowledgement that my services had always had monetary value, offered only when I threatened to withdraw them. I shook my head gently. It's not about money, Jessica. It's about balance and mutual respect. She left without another word, and I could hear her arguing with someone on her phone before her car even pulled out of my driveway. I assumed she was calling Daniel, trying to enlist his help in changing my mind. But I had made my decision based on careful consideration, and I wouldn't be swayed by guilt or manipulation. That afternoon, Charlie asked why I seemed different. Different how, sweetheart? I asked, settling beside him on my couch. Happier, he said simply. Like when you smile at the ducks at the park. His observation touched me deeply. Even at 5 years old, he could sense that I was reclaiming something that had been missing. I was rediscovering joy in my own life, not just in my service to others. I am happier, I told him honestly. Sometimes grown-ups need to make changes to feel better about themselves. Like when I stopped letting Tommy take my toys at school? He asked. Exactly like that, I said, amazed by his insight. Sometimes we have to say no to things that don't feel good. Over the weekend, Daniel called to discuss my schedule changes. His voice was careful, diplomatic, clearly the result of extensive conversations with Jessica. Mom, Jessica mentioned that you want to reduce your time with the boys. Is there something we should talk about? I chose my words carefully, still unwilling to create marital problems for my son. I love spending time with Charlie and Max, but I think it would be healthy for me to have more balance in my life. Has Jessica done something to upset you? He asked directly. The question hung in the air, loaded with potential for either truth or continued protection of his marriage. I thought about Jessica's phone conversation, her treatment of me as hired help, her complete lack of appreciation for everything I had sacrificed for their family. Daniel, I just need some time to focus on my own interests, I said finally. 3 days a week is still a significant contribution to your family's childcare needs. He was quiet for a moment. You're right, of course. We've been taking advantage of your generosity, and I apologize for that. Jessica is just stressed about finding reliable care for the other days. His acknowledgement meant everything to me. This was why I loved my son so deeply. He could recognize when something wasn't right and adjust his perspective accordingly. Unlike his wife, he saw me as a person with my own needs and limitations. I understand that it creates challenges, I said. But I'm confident you and Jessica will find good solutions. We will, he said firmly. And Mom, thank you for everything. I know we haven't said it enough, but we're grateful for all you do. Those words sustained me through the following week, as Jessica scrambled to arrange alternative childcare and made several pointed comments about the inconvenience my decision was causing. I remained calm and cheerful, enjoying my time with Charlie and Max while mentally preparing for the larger changes that were coming. The inheritance funds were scheduled to be available the following Monday, the same day my new schedule would begin. I had already made appointments with a financial advisor and a travel agent. ready to begin the next phase of my life with wisdom and intention. But first, I had one more conversation with Jessica that would determine the future of our relationship. It happened the following Friday evening, when she arrived to pick up the boys after what would be my last full week of 5-day childcare. Charlie and Max were in my backyard, building an elaborate obstacle course using lawn chairs and jump ropes, their laughter floating through my open kitchen windows. "Margaret, I need to ask you to reconsider this schedule change," Jessica said without preamble. "I've looked into professional childcare for Mondays and Fridays, and it's going to cost us over $400 a week." I continued washing the dinner dishes that the boys and I had used, keeping my voice calm and level. "I understand that professional childcare is expensive. That's why I'm grateful I can continue helping 3 days a week. But you don't understand the financial strain this puts on our family," she pressed. "Daniel's business is growing, but we have the mortgage, the cars, the boys, activities. We simply cannot afford to pay for 2 days of professional care every week." I turned to face her, remembering all the times I had absorbed similar expenses without complaint or recognition. "Jessica, you've managed other financial challenges. I'm sure you'll find a way to handle this one." Her facade of politeness finally cracked. "Margaret, I don't think you understand your position here. We need you to be available when we need you. That's how this arrangement works." The phrase hung in the air between us, revealing everything I needed to know about how she truly perceived our relationship. Not as family members supporting each other, but as employer and employee, with her holding all the power. "Actually, Jessica, I think you're the one who doesn't understand the position," I said quietly. "I'm not your employee. I'm Charlie and Max's grandmother, and I choose to help your family because I love them. But that choice comes with conditions, and one of those conditions is being treated with respect." Her eyes narrowed. "Respect? Margaret, we've always treated you with respect." I dried my hands on the kitchen towel, taking a moment to consider my response. 3 years of accumulated hurt and disappointment rose to the surface, but I refused to let anger color my words. "Jessica, last month I overheard you telling someone on the phone that I was basically just the babysitter. You said I was cheaper than a nanny service, and that I never complained or asked for anything. You laughed about how convenient it was to have free childcare whenever you needed it." The color drained from her face as she realized I had heard her true thoughts about our arrangement. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked, as if she had forgotten that I was a real person who could be hurt by her words. "Margaret, that conversation was taken out of context. I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said," I interrupted gently, "and that's fine. You're entitled to your opinions. But I'm also entitled to make decisions based on how I'm treated." She stared at me for a long moment, perhaps seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Not as a convenient service provider, but as a woman with dignity, feelings, and the power to make her own choices. "So this is about revenge?" she asked finally. "You're going to punish our family because of one private conversation?" I shook my head. "This isn't about punishment, Jessica. It's about establishing boundaries that allow me to maintain my self-respect while still being part of Charlie and Max's lives." Before she could respond, the boys burst through the back door, grass stains on their knees and excitement in their voices as they described their elaborate obstacle course. Charlie immediately launched into a detailed explanation of how they had created jumping challenges, while Max demonstrated his newest tumbling technique on my kitchen floor. Their innocent joy provided a stark contrast to the tension that had been building between Jessica and me. "Mom, look what we built!" Charlie exclaimed, tugging on Jessica's designer blazer with his slightly dirty hands. She instinctively stepped back, brushing at the fabric while forcing a smile. "That's wonderful, honey. Why don't you go wash your hands while I finish talking to Grandma?" The boys obediently headed to my bathroom, their chatter echoing down the hallway as they argued about who had jumped the farthest. Jessica watched them go, and I could see her calculating something in her expression. When she turned back to me, her demeanor had shifted to something more strategic. "Margaret, I think we need to be practical about this situation," she said, lowering her voice. "The boys adore you, and change is hard for children. Don't you think it would be better for them if we maintained consistency in their routine?" It was a clever tactic, using my love for Charlie and Max as leverage to maintain the status quo. For a moment, I felt the familiar pull of guilt that had governed so many of my decisions over the past 3 years. The desire to put the children's needs above my own, to sacrifice my comfort for their stability. But something had fundamentally changed in my perspective over the past few weeks. Perhaps it was the shocking revelation of the inheritance, or maybe it was simply the accumulation of too many small indignities. Whatever the catalyst, I had finally recognized that constantly sacrificing my own well-being was not actually beneficial for anyone, including the grandchildren I loved so dearly. "The boys are resilient and adaptable," I replied calmly. "They'll adjust to the new schedule just fine." Children benefit from seeing the adults in their lives maintain healthy boundaries and self-respect. Jessica's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Margaret, I'm trying to be reasonable here. If you're feeling underappreciated, we can address that. Daniel and I are grateful for everything you do. If you're truly grateful, then you'll respect my decision to reduce my availability," I said, maintaining eye contact. 3 days a week is still a significant commitment, especially considering that I provide this care without any compensation. The word, compensation, seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Throughout our entire arrangement, money had never been explicitly discussed. She had simply assumed that my love for the boys meant I would provide unlimited free childcare, absorbing all associated costs as part of my grandmotherly duties. "Margaret, if this is about money, we can work something out," she said carefully, as if she were negotiating with a stranger rather than family. "It's not about money," I said firmly. "It's about recognition and respect. For 3 years, I've rearranged my entire life around your family's needs. I've given up social activities, personal interests, and my own schedule to be available whenever you needed me. I've spent thousands of dollars of my own money on groceries, activities, and supplies for the boys. And in return, I've been treated like hired help who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve." Her face flushed, but whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. "That's not fair, Margaret. We've always appreciated your help." "Have you?" I asked quietly. "When was the last time you thanked me for anything? When have you ever asked about my health, my interests, or my feelings? When have you included me in family decisions that affect the boys I spend most of my waking hours caring for?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. We both knew the answers to those questions, and they weren't flattering to her character. The boys returned from washing their hands, and Max immediately climbed onto my lap while Charlie began describing their plans for building an even bigger obstacle course next week. I held Max close, breathing in the sweet scent of his shampoo and feeling his small body relax against mine. These moments were precious beyond measure, and I would never take them for granted. "Grandma, will you help us build a fort on Tuesday?" Charlie asked, his brown eyes bright with anticipation. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, smoothing his hair. "We'll make the best fort ever." Jessica watched this interaction with an unreadable expression. Perhaps she was finally beginning to understand that my relationship with her sons transcended the utilitarian arrangement she had created in her mind. These children loved me not because I provided free childcare, but because I cherished every moment with them and treated them as the remarkable individuals they were becoming. "Boys, it's time to go home," Jessica announced, gathering their backpacks and jackets. "Daddy's making his special spaghetti tonight." As they prepared to leave, Charlie turned to me with a serious expression. "Grandma, are you sad about something?" His perceptiveness caught me off guard. Children have a remarkable ability to sense emotional undercurrents that adults try to hide, and Charlie had always been particularly intuitive about the feelings of people he cared about. "I'm not sad, honey," I assured him, kneeling down to his eye level. "Sometimes grown-ups need to make changes in their lives, but that doesn't mean I'm sad. I love you and Max very much, and that will never change." He nodded solemnly, then wrapped his arms around my neck in a fierce hug. "I love you too, Grandma." More than ice cream. Max, not to be outdone by his brother's declaration, announced, "I love you more than dinosaurs and trucks combined." Their innocent expressions of affection filled my heart, while simultaneously reinforcing my determination to maintain my dignity in this situation. These boys deserve to see their grandmother valued and respected, not dismissed and taken for granted. Someday, They would be adults making decisions about their own relationships and boundaries. I wanted them to remember that love should never require the complete surrender of self-respect. After they left, I spent the evening reviewing my finances and making concrete plans for the upcoming changes in my life. The inheritance would be available in just 3 more days, and I wanted to be prepared to make thoughtful decisions about this unexpected windfall. I had already scheduled appointments with a financial advisor recommended by the law firm, and I had researched several philanthropic organizations that aligned with my values. The local food bank where I had volunteered before taking on full-time childcare duties could benefit from a substantial donation. The children's literacy program at the Riverside Public Library deserved support for all the joy they had brought to Charlie, Max, and me over the years. But beyond charitable giving, I was also considering more personal investments in my own future. Travel had always been a dream deferred due to limited resources and family obligations. Thomas and I had planned to visit Europe after his retirement, but his illness and death had ended those hopes. Now, at 73, I still had time to see the world and experience adventures I had only imagined. I was also thinking about my living situation. My modest 2-bedroom house had served me well, but it was showing its age and required increasing maintenance that was becoming difficult for me to manage. Perhaps it was time to consider a smaller, more modern home in a community designed for active seniors. Somewhere with social opportunities, fitness facilities, and medical care easily accessible. The irony of these possibilities was not lost on me. Jessica, who saw me as a financial burden and spoke dismissively about my circumstances, had no idea that I was about to become wealthier than her entire extended family. The woman who treated me like expendable help was about to discover that her cheap babysitter could afford luxuries she could only dream about. But my plans weren't motivated by a desire for revenge or to prove anything to Jessica. They were motivated by a newfound understanding of my own worth and potential. For too long, I had defined myself primarily in terms of my service to others, as Thomas's wife, Daniel's mother, Charlie and Max's grandmother. While those relationships remained central to my identity, I was finally ready to explore who Margaret Rodriguez could be when she prioritized her own needs and desires. The weekend passed quietly, with Daniel calling to check on me and reiterate his appreciation for my continued help with the boys. He seemed genuinely concerned about the changes I was implementing, but he also expressed understanding for my need to maintain better balance in my life. "Mom, I hope you know that Jessica and I both realize how much we've been depending on you," he said during our Sunday evening conversation. "Maybe it's good that you're forcing us to be more self-sufficient." His words gave me hope that he was beginning to see the situation more clearly. Daniel had always been fair-minded and considerate, qualities I had worked hard to instill in him throughout his childhood. If he could recognize the imbalance in our current arrangement, perhaps there was potential for healthier family dynamics moving forward. Monday morning arrived with unseasonably warm October sunshine streaming through my bedroom windows. I dressed carefully in my best navy blue dress and pearl earrings, preparing for what I knew would be a momentous day. The bank had confirmed that the inheritance funds would be available by 10 o'clock, and I had scheduled my first appointment with the financial advisor for that afternoon. But first, I needed to have one more conversation with Jessica. She arrived at her usual time, 7:30 sharp, with the boys already dressed and fed for their day. Charlie and Max bounded into my house with their typical enthusiasm, immediately asking about our plans for the morning. I hugged them both tightly, savoring these moments of uncomplicated love and joy. "Jessica, could you stay for a few minutes?" I asked, as she prepared to rush off to her first meeting. "There's something important I need to discuss with you." She glanced at her watch impatiently, but something in my tone must have convinced her that this conversation couldn't be postponed. She followed me into my kitchen while the boys settled in my living room with the educational puzzles I kept specifically for their visits. "I want you to know that my decision to reduce my availability has nothing to do with Charlie and Max," I began, pouring myself a cup of coffee and offering her one, which she declined. "They are the lights of my life, and I treasure every moment I spend with them." "Then why are you doing this?" she asked, her frustration evident. "Margaret, I've looked into professional childcare, and it's going to cost us nearly $2,000 a month. That's money we simply don't have in our budget right now. I studied her face, noting the genuine concern beneath her irritation. Perhaps she truly didn't understand how her treatment of me had affected our relationship, or maybe she simply couldn't comprehend that her actions had consequences. Jessica, over the past 3 years, I estimate that I've provided approximately 6,000 hours of childcare for your family, I said calmly. If you had paid the going rate for professional nanny services, that would have cost you roughly $120,000. Her eyes widened as she processed the mathematics of my contribution. I could see her calculating the numbers, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what I had been providing without compensation or recognition. Additionally, I've spent approximately $15,000 of my own money on groceries, activities, transportation, and supplies for the boys. I continued. I've also absorbed the wear and tear on my vehicle, increased utility costs from having children in my home daily, and the opportunity costs of giving up my own social activities and personal interests. Jessica sank into one of my kitchen chairs, looking stunned. I never thought about it in those terms. I didn't expect you to, I said gently. Family members help each other without keeping detailed accounts. But when that help becomes an expectation, rather than a gift, and when it's accompanied by disrespect rather than gratitude, it's time to reassess the arrangement. She was quiet for several minutes, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up at me, there was something different in her expression. Not quite remorse, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "Margaret, I owe you an apology," she said slowly. "You're right that I haven't been appreciative enough of everything you do for our family. I think I started taking your help for granted because you always seemed so willing to do whatever we needed." It was a start, but I could hear the underlying implication in her words. That my willingness to help had somehow justified her lack of appreciation, that my love for the boys had made it acceptable for her to treat me as hired help. "Jessica, I want you to understand something very clearly," I said, setting down my coffee cup and meeting her eyes directly. "My love for Charlie and Max is not contingent on how you treat me. I will always be their grandmother, and I will always cherish my relationship with them. But my availability to provide childcare is contingent on being treated with respect and consideration." She nodded, though I suspected she still didn't fully grasp the depth of the changes I was implementing. "So if I'm more appreciative, more considerate, you'll go back to the 5-day schedule?" The question revealed that she still viewed this as a negotiation, a problem to be solved through better behavior on her part. She didn't understand that my transformation was fundamental and permanent, not a bargaining tactic to secure better treatment. "No, Jessica," I said firmly. "The 3-day schedule is what works for me now. I have other interests and commitments that I want to pursue." "What other interests?" she asked, and I could hear genuine curiosity mixed with skepticism in her voice. For a moment, I considered telling her about the inheritance, about the opportunities that had suddenly opened up in my life. But I decided to keep that information private for now, sharing it with Daniel first and allowing the news to unfold naturally. "I'm considering some travel," I said simply. "I'd also like to volunteer more regularly with organizations that are important to me. And I want to have time for social activities with friends my own age." Jessica absorbed this information with obvious surprise. Perhaps she had never considered that I might have desires and interests beyond serving her family's needs. In her mind, I existed primarily as Charlie and Max's grandmother, with no independent identity or aspirations. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose we'll have to adjust to the new arrangement." It wasn't the enthusiastic acceptance I might have hoped for, but it represented a grudging acknowledgement that my decision was final. I could work with that, at least as a starting point for rebuilding our relationship on more equitable terms. The boys spent a wonderful morning with me, helping to bake cookies and creating elaborate stories about the adventures of their favorite stuffed animals. Charlie had brought his beloved teddy bear, Mr. Buttons, while Max carried everywhere a small plastic dinosaur he had named Chomper. Together, we invented a tale about Mr. Buttons and Chomper, exploring a magical forest filled with talking trees and friendly dragons. Their imagination and creativity never ceased to amaze me, At 5 years old, they could construct elaborate narratives, solve complex problems, and demonstrate empathy and kindness that many adults seem to have forgotten. Spending time with them reminded me daily of the wonder and possibility that existed in the world if we took the time to notice and nurture it. At 10:15, my phone buzzed with a text message from the bank confirming that the inheritance funds had been successfully transferred to my account. I stared at the notification for a long moment, still struggling to believe that my financial situation had changed so dramatically overnight. I was now a multimillionaire. The afternoon appointment with the financial advisor went better than I had expected. Patricia Chen was a woman close to my own age, who specialized in helping clients manage sudden windfalls and plan for their retirement years. She listened carefully as I explained my situation, my priorities, and my concerns about making wise decisions with this unexpected inheritance. "Mrs. Rodriguez, the most important thing to remember is that this money gives you choices," she said, reviewing the portfolio options she had prepared. "You don't have to make all your decisions immediately. We can invest conservatively while you take time to determine how you want to use these resources." We discussed various strategies for preserving the principal while generating steady income, as well as options for charitable giving that would provide tax benefits while supporting causes important to me. Patricia also recommended consulting with an estate planning attorney to ensure that my own will reflected my current circumstances and intentions. By the time I left her office, I felt more confident about managing this windfall responsibly. The money would be invested wisely, generating enough income to support a comfortable lifestyle, while preserving the principal for future needs or charitable bequests. I would never have to worry about financial security again, and I could make decisions based on my values and desires rather than economic necessity. That evening, I called Daniel to share the news about the inheritance. His reaction was everything I could have hoped for: surprise, joy, and immediate concern for my well-being. "Mom, that's incredible!" he exclaimed after I finished explaining about Thomas's uncle and the legal processes involved. Dad would be so amazed to know that his family remembered him after all these years. "I keep thinking about how much he would have enjoyed knowing about Uncle Samuel," I said, feeling a bittersweet mixture of joy and loss. "Your father always wondered about his relatives in Mexico, but he never pursued contact because of some old family dispute he never fully understood." "Well, now you can honor his memory by making good use of this gift," Daniel said warmly. "Have you thought about what you want to do with it?" I shared some of my preliminary plans. The charitable donations, the travel possibilities, the idea of finding a new home better suited to my current needs. Daniel listened thoughtfully, asking questions and offering suggestions with the same careful attention he brought to his architectural projects. "I think it's wonderful that you're considering all these options," he said. "You've spent so many years taking care of other people. It's time for you to focus on your own happiness and fulfillment." His words meant more to me than he could possibly know. This was the son I had raised to be considerate and supportive, the young man who had grown into someone I could be proud of in every aspect of his character. "Daniel, I want you to know that this inheritance doesn't change my love for you or my desire to be part of your family's life," I said carefully. "I'm still committed to helping with Charlie and Max, just on a more sustainable schedule." "Mom, I completely understand," he replied immediately. "If anything, knowing that you're financially secure makes me feel better about the boundaries you're setting. You should never feel obligated to provide childcare out of economic necessity." I realized that he might have been worrying about my financial situation, wondering if I was struggling to make ends meet on my modest income. Learning about the inheritance would relieve those concerns and allow him to see my decisions as choices rather than sacrifices. "There is one more thing I want to discuss with you," I said, hesitating slightly. "I'm planning to update my will to reflect my current circumstances. I want to make sure that Charlie and Max are provided for, but I also want to support some charitable causes that are important to me." "Of course," Daniel said immediately. "Mom, this is your inheritance, and you should use it however feels right to you. Jessica and I are both financially stable, and we would never expect or want you to feel obligated to leave everything to us." His response confirmed what I already knew about his character, but it also highlighted the contrast between his attitude and Jessica's sense of entitlement. Daniel saw the inheritance as my resource to use according to my own values and priorities. I suspected Jessica would have very different feelings about how this money should be allocated. Tuesday arrived with a gentle autumn rain that made my house feel cozy and intimate. Charlie and Max spent the morning reading books by my fireplace, taking turns choosing stories from my extensive collection of children's literature. We made hot chocolate with tiny marshmallows and talked about their upcoming Halloween costumes, which Jessica had finally purchased after realizing I wouldn't be providing them as I had in previous years. In the afternoon, we worked on a craft project, creating leaf collages using specimens we had collected during our recent park visits. The boys concentrated intensely on arranging their leaves into patterns and pictures, their small tongues poking out in concentration as they made artistic decisions. "Grandma, why do leaves change colors?" Charlie asked as he carefully glued a bright red maple leaf onto his paper. I explained about chlorophyll and seasonal changes, in terms he could understand, marveling once again at his curiosity about the natural world. These conversations were among my greatest joys, watching their minds grow and expand, helping them understand the wonders that surrounded them every day. When Jessica arrived to collect them that evening, she seemed more subdued than usual. She thanked me for their day, asked about their activities, and even complimented the leaf collages they proudly displayed. "Margaret, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," she said as the boys gathered their backpacks. "You were right that I haven't been as appreciative as I should be. I want to do better." It was a small step, but it felt significant. Perhaps she was beginning to understand that relationships required mutual respect and consideration. That taking people for granted eventually had consequences. "I appreciate that, Jessica," I replied. "I think we can build a better relationship moving forward." As they prepared to leave, Max suddenly ran back to me and threw his arms around my waist. "Grandma, I had the best day ever. Can we make more leaf pictures on Thursday?" "Absolutely, sweetheart," I promised, hugging him tightly. "We'll make a whole gallery of autumn art." Charlie joined the hug, and for a moment, the three of us stood wrapped together in the simple, pure love that connected us regardless of adult complications and conflicts. These moments reminded me why I would never completely withdraw from their lives, no matter how challenging their mother became. After they left, I spent the evening researching travel destinations and making preliminary plans for my first major trip in decades. I had always dreamed of visiting the Greek islands, with their ancient history, stunning architecture, and azure waters. Now, with my newfound financial freedom, I could make that dream a reality. I also began researching senior living communities in the area, curious about what options might be available if I decided to downsize my living situation. Many of the facilities I found online offered impressive amenities: fitness centers, art studios, social clubs, and continuing education programs. The idea of being surrounded by peers with similar interests and energy levels was appealing after years of somewhat isolated living. Wednesday morning brought unseasonably warm weather, perfect for an outdoor adventure with Charlie and Max. We decided to visit the Riverside Nature Center, where we could explore hiking trails and observe local wildlife in their natural habitats. The boys were fascinated by everything we encountered: squirrels gathering acorns for winter, birds building nests in preparation for migration, and insects busy with their seasonal activities. We spent nearly an hour watching a family of ducks in the center's pond, discussing their behavior and making up stories about their individual personalities. "That one is the daddy duck," Max announced, pointing to the largest mallard. "He's protecting his family from danger." "How do you know he's the daddy?" Charlie asked skeptically. "Because he's swimming in front," Max explained with 5-year-old logic. "Daddies always go first to make sure it's safe." Their interpretation of duck family dynamics made me smile, especially considering how it reflected their own understanding of parental roles. In their experience, parents were protectors and providers, people who put their children's needs first and ensured their safety and happiness. As we walked along the nature trails, I found myself thinking about the letter I planned to write to Jessica. Not a confrontational or angry letter, but a thoughtful explanation of my perspective and hopes for our future relationship. She deserved to understand the impact her behavior had on me, but she also deserved the opportunity to rebuild our connection on healthier terms. That afternoon, while the boys napped on my living room couch, exhausted from our outdoor exploration, I sat at my kitchen table and began drafting that letter. Dear Jessica, I wrote, I want you to understand that my recent decisions about childcare are not attempts to punish you or create difficulties for your family. They are simply the result of my need to maintain balance and self-respect in my life. I continued writing for nearly an hour, choosing my words carefully to convey both my hurt and my hope for improvement. The letter explained how her casual dismissal of my contributions had affected me, how being treated as hired help had eroded my sense of worth and belonging in the family. But I also wrote about my continued love for Charlie and Max, my desire to remain an important part of their lives, and my willingness to work toward a more respectful and appreciative relationship with her. The letter was honest but not cruel, firm but not hostile. When I finished writing, I read through it several times, editing for clarity and tone. This letter might be the key to determining whether Jessica and I could find a way to coexist peacefully for the sake of the children we both loved. Thursday morning arrived with crisp, clear skies and the promise of another beautiful day with my grandsons. As I prepared breakfast for their arrival, I reflected on how much my life had changed in just 1 week. The inheritance had given me financial security and unlimited options for my future. But more importantly, the process of setting boundaries with Jessica had restored my sense of personal dignity and self-worth. I was no longer just the babysitter. I was Margaret Rodriguez, a woman of substance and value, someone deserving of respect and consideration. The money hadn't changed who I was, but it had given me the confidence to insist on being treated according to my true worth. When Jessica dropped off the boys that morning, I handed her the letter I had written. Please read this when you have time, I said simply. It explains my feelings about everything that's happened, and it outlines my hopes for our relationship moving forward. She accepted the letter with curiosity and what looked like slight apprehension. Should I be worried about what this says? No, I assured her. It's honest, but it's also hopeful. I think it will help you understand my perspective. As she left for work, I noticed her glancing back at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Perhaps she was finally beginning to see me as more than a convenient service provider, more than someone who existed solely to meet her family's needs. The day ahead stretched before me with endless possibilities. Time with Charlie and Max, activities we would enjoy together, conversations that would help shape their understanding of the world. But unlike previous days, I approached these hours with a sense of my own agency and worth. I was no longer sacrificing myself for the sake of others. I was choosing to share my love and time with people who mattered to me, while maintaining the boundaries necessary for my own well-being. And tomorrow would bring new choices, new opportunities to honor both my commitments to others and my responsibilities to myself. That evening, Jessica called me at home. Her voice was different, quieter, almost vulnerable. She had read my letter twice and wanted to talk. We agreed to meet for coffee the next morning, just the two of us, while Daniel watched the boys. When we sat across from each other at the small cafe downtown, Jessica looked smaller somehow, less polished than usual. She apologized sincerely for treating me poorly, admitting she had never considered how her words and actions affected me. She had been so focused on managing her career and household that she forgot I was family, not staff. I want to start over, she said, tears in her eyes. I want Charlie and Max to see us working together respectfully. I accepted her apology, recognizing the genuine remorse in her voice. We established new guidelines for our relationship, including regular appreciation, inclusion in family decisions affecting the boys, and acknowledgement of my contributions. The inheritance remained my secret for now, but it had given me the strength to demand the respect I deserved. Over the following months, Jessica kept her promises, treating me as a valued family member rather than convenient help. Years later, when Charlie and Max were teenagers, they would remember their grandmother not as someone who sacrificed everything silently, but as a woman who stood up for herself while never wavering in her love for them. They learned that healthy relationships required mutual respect, that love didn't mean accepting poor treatment, and that setting boundaries was an act of self-care, not selfishness. My inheritance allowed me to travel, volunteer, and pursue interests I had long deferred, But the real treasure was reclaiming my dignity and teaching my grandsons what authentic love looked like. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.